The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Let's keep going on the nonsense. That's what this week is for. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everybody. I am Dan Besbris. This is a Hoop Ball presentation, as my good friend Stefania? I don't know. I didn't come up with a name for the British lady. What do you think the name... Okay, that's a good thing to do. That'll be a fun way to start the podcast. This is what's happening before anybody has a chance to tune me out today. I want you guys to tweet at me with what you think we should call the British lady who does our voiceover work. What is her name? It doesn't matter. I mean, whatever people like, I'll just start referring to her as that. I'm going to come onto the podcast and I'll say, thanks, Angeline. I don't know. You guys come up with something. That's not my job. It's actually not your job either, but I'm asking you to do it. It'll be like a newscast. Back to you, Angeline. And then she'll say, this has been a Hoop Ball presentation. And that's how you know it's done. At Dan Besbris on Twitter, that's where you can send me the woman's name. What is it? What's her name? I honestly don't know. Brewski might know. I think he got those voiceovers done for us. I don't know her name, but you guys can call her whatever you want. Anything clean, I'll talk about it on a future podcast, and I'll do something stupid with it. That's borderline entertaining for you, right? Right. Go to hoop-ball.com if you want to check out the offseason coverage of the NBA. It, of course, continues with more free agency news. Nothing really happening over the last 24 hours outside of a couple of sort of league notes with the NBA saying they're going to change the time that free agency starts, probably by next year, so that things can get televised. Clint Capella apparently within about $10 to $15 million of where he wants his new deal with the Rockets to end up, so he's probably just going to be back there. I mean, we figured as much. Question is, does he want to do the whole bet-on-self thing? The latest news, by the way, is that the Rockets offered him a 5-year, $85 million contract, which, by the way, $17 million a year is not a bad contract. But supposedly Capella wants money in the Rudy Gobert, Steven Adams range with, let's be honest, Steven Adams is wildly overpaid right now. He's a solid basketball player and he does good stuff for the Thunder, but $25 million a year is way too much. Rudy Gobert at $25 million a year, not too much. He impacts the game much more than Steven Adams does. And there's a chance that Adams could be more impactful if, say, he was getting the rebounds that he was boxing out for, but they all end up in Russell Westbrook's hands, so that's where things get clustered up over there. So for Capella, I mean, asking for Rudy Gobert money is probably a bit too significant. What if you put a guy like Gobert on the Rockets? I mean, it'd be crazy the type of things that he could do. I don't think Clint Capella is as good or as useful a basketball player as Gobert in a vacuum. He is a fantastic fit for the Houston Rockets, and that's why they're offering him freaking $85 million a year. But I'm not going to get upset with Capella. He's got his number. His guys are negotiating on it. They'll probably get to a number and be fine with the Rockets. But the option is on the table as a restricted free agent. He could take the $5 million qualifying offer and become unrestricted next year. It would cost him, as things currently stand, $12 million this coming season. Does he want to push $12 million into the middle in the hopes that he gets a deal starting the following year that ends up making him $12 million more over the next 3 years? Following 3 years. That's got to be the math. He needs to make more than $85 million over the next 4 seasons. And by taking just 5 in year 1, that would mean that he would need to make, you can do the math, 80 of those 85. Excuse me, a 5-year deal. So over the following 4 years. Apologies, guys. For some reason, I started to make his deal a 4-year deal. So he takes 5, leaves 80 on the table for the following 4 years. He would need to make a $20 million contract after that over 4 seasons. You get it. That's really the only thing we've heard. Marcus Smart drawing interest from a couple of teams. The restricted free agent market has been a rough one this year. Maybe we should have seen this coming, but I certainly didn't. I'm guessing executives did because they looked at it and they said, well, everybody's saving up cash for 2019, so nobody wants to dump a bunch of money into a restricted free agent, largely because those guys tend to be not LeBron-level players. Right? Like Marcus Smart, he's helpful. From a reality standpoint, he's helpful for your team. He's not much help from a fantasy standpoint. But he's not going to win you a title by himself. He doesn't have that level of contribution. So anyways, for those of you that have been listening this week, you know what we're doing. We're finally getting into the fantasy results of last week's free agent bonanza. Yesterday, we talked about the biggest names. On Monday, I talked about the names that signed over the weekend. There hasn't really been a true order to the madness over here. Just figured we'd start the week on Monday with whatever happened most recently at that point, which was the Brook Lopez and Zach LaVine stuff. Yesterday, talking to Adrian Benjamins here on the podcast, we finally really dug into, what does it mean for the biggest names? LeBron moving to the Lakers, Chris Paul, Paul George, Boogie. We got into Boogie, Tyreek Evans. And today, I am solo on the podcast. By the way, we'll be back with Neil Rochelani tomorrow, and then Neil and Adrian will have the show on Friday. We'll wrap up our little tour of the free agent stuff. Next week, we'll start getting into what all of this shakeup means for the teams that these guys are on. Not just the players themselves. That's what we're doing this week. This week is about the players, and next week is about the other guys, the teams. And that'll last for a while. We're going to go back through all the teams, just like we did in May. What does it mean now? In May we did a season in review. What did the Nets accomplish? What did we take away from it? Okay, now we go back. Okay, Brooklyn re-signed Joe Harris. They brought in Ed Davis. They brought in and then got rid of Dwight Howard. Timofey Mozgov is gone. How does this all change things for them? And I don't know that every team necessarily needs its own episode of Fantasy NBA Today, and there will certainly be stories that pop up that deserve an episode of this podcast. We'll have recaps mixed in there. When all is said and done, rehashing the league will probably take a month to a month and a half. So that's what, again, is coming up on the podcast. Today's episode of Fantasy NBA Today, it's Dan's choice, because, well, that's me and nobody can stop me. Which guys we want to talk about on today's show? Well, what I did before coming on air was I went through my whole mega list of all the guys that got signed last week, and I just crossed off all the names of dudes that I believe to be completely irrelevant from a fantasy perspective. So that pared things down a little bit, and that left us with still a crap load of guys. Oof. But I did get to cross off Amir Johnson, so, cool. And I had him on my list as Fat Ray, but Ray Felton also off my list. Hooray! Really thinned it out. The guys that remain on the list, they are numerous. They are significant. And we have to talk about as many of them as we can over the next 3 episodes of this podcast. Good luck to us. So there's no real significant order to this. I just looked back at the beginning and thought, who would be interesting to talk about? And one of the names that popped up very quickly was Elfrid Payton. Because every year, the world tries to talk me into caring about Elfrid Payton, and every year, the world fails to talk me into caring about Elfrid Payton. And to this point, I've felt pretty good about that fact. He has been, by all accounts, a fantasy underachiever every year. Not that he's necessarily been bad every year. He was pretty bad this season, by the way. But a fantasy underachiever. I think most folks looked at his 1.7 steals during his rookie campaign and thought, oh boy, as this guy evolves, he's going to become something really fantastic. He'll be one of those point guards. He'll be Ricky Rubio-esque. Big steals, big assists, 1 out of the 2 percentages, and it just hasn't happened. He's turned out to be god-awful from a fantasy perspective, and really not very good from a reality perspective either. This most recent season, Elfrid Payton averaged 12.7 points per game. This is in 29 minutes per game, by the way, on 49% shooting, which was a career high, so we'll give him that one. 65% at the free throw line, which has always been bad for him. 6.2 assists, which is solid, but not spectacular. And 4.3 rebounds, which feels obscenely low for a point guard of his stature. He's a big dude. He's a 6'5 point guard. 6'5", 190? Is that something like that? There are these... And 1.3 steals, by the way. That's a number that has pretty much steadily come down from the 1.7. His freshman campaign, he's been sitting in the 1.1 to 1.3 range ever since then. We all thought that he was going to surge in Phoenix, but he couldn't get any leash with the Suns, and then they just let him walk. That's fine for them. It didn't hurt much. They unloaded crap in the process. It was worth a shot. Hey, maybe he'll pan out. He didn't pan out. What's to change this coming year, and why is Dan about to say the following? I think I kind of like Elfrid Payton this coming season. Not because I think his game is going to change dramatically. No, far be it from that to occur. He's not going to add the three-pointer magically. He's not going to magically become a good foul shooter. I just think that he's now coming off of a disaster of a year where Payton sat around top 130. Pretty brutal for a guy that there were websites telling you to take him in the 50 to 70 range. And we said, whoa, whoa there, Tiger. This is a guy that has multiple large deficiencies in his game. Turns it over too much. Can't shoot the free throw. Doesn't touch the three-pointer. It's like take Giannis Antetokounmpo and then remove all the good stuff. Well, that's not very nice. Here I'm picking on Elfrid Payton. I'm really picking on his fantasy game. But when a guy has that poor of a season, when he drops to 130, when everybody drafted him and he ended up 6 to 7 rounds worse than where they got him, there's going to be a backlash. There's going to be a desire to write him off and let him fall into the hundreds. And I think there's a pretty reasonable chance that in a good situation this coming year, he'll be on a solid team with Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday, and Julius Randle and Niko Mirotic. It's not that he needs massive opportunity. It's just that he needs to be in an environment where things can be tailored a little bit to his game. The Pelicans just want him to be new Rondo. That's all they're asking. That's all they're asking of Payton. Come in and be like Rondo was. By the way, where did Rajon Rondo finish last year? Top 130. He didn't shoot much. He assisted a lot. And that's basically what they want from Elfrid Payton. Don't take a ton of shots. If you do, take them near the rim because you're more athletic than Rondo was. Get a few more assists. Try to keep the steals up. Get the field goal percentage up. And I think there's a very real possibility that Payton climbs back into the top 100. Much higher than that? Well, it's going to be tough as the fourth or fifth fiddle on this team. But he's falling past 100. Just keep an eye on that. And if you could take him like around 120 to 130, where he ended this year, there's an opportunity for you to steal an assist guy very late in a draft. Those guys are tough to come by after about the 75 to 80 mark. Just something to keep in mind. Not total hatred from Dan anymore for Elfrid Payton. Another name that popped up in my sort of initial gazing at this free agent list is JaVale McGee, who is not at all on the fantasy radar. Because with the Warriors, there was just no way. There was just no chance. he's never going to be the guy that he was very early in his career. He's developed, I believe it's asthma-related symptoms, so you can't play him for more than 5 or 6 minutes at a time. But he averaged, in 2 years with the Warriors, under 10 minutes per game and 1 block in that mark. 0.9 blocks per game in 9.5 minutes per game. The Lakers aren't going to play him 30 minutes a night. He's not going to make it. But he could probably get up into that 18 to 22 range. I think sometimes, depending on who the competition is for the Lakers, we'll have a better feel for that when we see precisely how he's deployed. But given the fact that the Bucks signed Brook Lopez away from LA, the only other real center on the market is Clint Capella, and the Rockets are going to match him. The Lakers aren't about to go invest in some random dude just for the sake of it at this point. In fact, if they were going to do that, it was going to be Brook Lopez, and they didn't, presumably because the Lakers want to leave that salary cap window open so they can more easily trade for Kawhi Leonard. All that being rolled together now into one beautiful little blintz. JaVale McGee, Ivica Zubac, and Moritz Wagner are the 3 centers on the Lakers roster right now. I think that means McGee's the starter. There's this weird desire, by the way, in the NBA to start traditional centers and then you just yank them and go small at some point. And you know darn well the Lakers are going to do it. But if McGee is actually starting the ball game, he's probably going to play 4 to 6 minutes at the beginning. One would assume. You don't usually see a guy come out before the 9 or 8 minute mark in the first quarter. That'd be a very early substitution. I feel like Dirk Nowitzki was the only guy that came out before the 8 minute mark sometimes. And the Mavs had weird rotations, but he ended up getting back in there for 3 stretches of 4 to 6 minutes in the first half. That's how Dirk got to about 25 minutes a game. It was like a 4-6-4 thing. I don't think that McGee's going to be in 3 separate stretches in the first half. But if he's getting 5 minutes to start the first quarter and 5 minutes somewhere in the second quarter and 5 or 6 minutes in the third quarter, the question, I think, is would he ever get back in the fourth? So that's where your egg on top of the roof is sitting. I think you'll see McGee play 15 minutes at a minimum. The question is, can the asthma handle it, and can the rotations handle him getting back in for another 3 or 4 late in a ball game? Or anywhere in the fourth quarter. Or maybe they play him in 3 6-minute stretches, and then you get him up to 18 minutes. All that to say, how many guys out there can actually put up fantasy value in 15 to 20 minutes? The answer is very few. Jordan Bell had the stat set to do it. And JaVale McGee kind of has the stat set to do it. He's going to be playing alongside LeBron James most of the time when he's on the floor, which means he's going to be getting dunks. So even if he only takes 4 or 5 shots a game, there's a very real chance he makes 65 to 70% of them because there's just going to be nothing else going on. He could get you 8 points in a brief stretch. He could get you 5 rebounds, 8 and 5 with 2 blocks. It's specialist territory, but it's last round of the draft territory. For the wacky chance that he plays 17 to 19 minutes, that can lift your fantasy team in 2 key categories. So there's your JaVale McGee weird take of the day. One of the guys that I had put on my list of watch dudes that I haven't talked a whole lot about yet is Mario Hezonja. He finished as a top 150 guy in 9 category leagues, which definitely does not move the needle. Not even remotely close. However, if you break it down and you look at what Hezonja did during those stretches where he was given the opportunity to actually sort of run free, he was a top 65 guy I don't think people realize that. He was putting up serious numbers during those brief but exciting stretches. There was a 32-game stretch between roughly the beginning of February and the end of the regular season, where Hezonja averaged 13 points, 5 boards, 2 assists, 1.5 threes, 1.7 steals, 0.6 blocks on 84% at the free throw line, and a much sadder 42.5% from the field. He's just that kind of wing guy that's always available late in drafts that gives you a smattering of statistics. A smattering. That's all we're asking for from a guy like Hezonja. Get in there, do a little bit of everything, be a top, 90 guy that I snagged at the very end of a draft that I can just safely leave in my lineup. Or, hell, maybe I'm a crazy deep team and he's my bench guy that I stick in when a starter gets hurt. Wednesdays, where it's 9,000 trash trucks in a row. You guys have to listen to that again in the background. Apologies, everyone. Apologies. Anyway, back to Mario Hezonja. There were some games in there that were pretty remarkable. For instance, he had a game on March 24th, albeit against the Phoenix Suns, so, good competition, where Hezonja had 14 points, 8 boards, 4 assists, 4 steals, 2 blocks, and a 3-pointer. 7 money counters in that ball game. He was going bonkers. He was going straight bananas, especially in February, by the way. He had a 10 money counter game against the Chicago Bulls on February 12th. 24-6 with 4 steals, 3 blocks, and 3 3-pointers. Don't tell me the Knicks aren't going to play this dude. Will he put up those type of numbers? Probably not. But you know what? A game like that does average out with the uglier ones. The issue for Hezonja in Orlando has always been whether he'll be aggressive enough to get some shots up. You got to do something with your time on the court. You can't just stand around like we'll keep this show clean. You can't just stand around like an idiot. And that is my fear of something that could happen with the Knicks. But I got a feeling this dude is going to get drafted late in fantasy drafts. So another really interesting late draft guy who by the way, I'd rather have Hezonja than either Elfrid Payton or JaVale McGee. I'm talking about all these late draft dudes on today's show. Hezonja is my favorite of those 3. No question about it. He has the fantasy stat set to make a difference in your lineup, whereas there aren't enough minutes for McGee to really make a huge difference. Your hope there is that he can get you 1.5 blocks a game. And for Elfrid Payton, the fantasy stat set is clunky. I just like him because I think he'll be undervalued. Maybe he gets off to a decent start and you could move him. I talk a lot about Trevor Ariza on Twitter, and I don't think I've talked enough about him on an actual podcast. He is not a late-round guy. Trevor Ariza is the number 60 guy in fantasy forever. I think even after he retires, they're just going to leave a spot open. It's going to be like how elevators don't have a 13th floor because everybody finds it unlucky, right? You can't go to a 13th floor in a lot of hotels. I think fantasy final numbers at the end of the year, number 60 is just going to be Trevor Ariza. They're just going to put his name there. It's like Elijah's seat on Passover for you listeners of the Jewish faith. You're just leaving a spot open so that Ariza can walk in and take it, even if he's not playing. By the way, Trevor, 33 years old. I think most folks believe him to be 45 already. He's the same age as LeBron. He's the same age as Chris Paul. They're all right in that same window. By the way, should be known, Trevor Ariza and I grew up like a couple blocks from one another, just 3 years apart. I never knew the guy, but he and I lived in the same community as a little kid. Didn't know his family, didn't know who he was. Just one of those weird things. Los Angeles connection. Trevor Ariza, by all accounts, last season had his worst year in a while, largely because he missed a bunch of time. Do we believe that this is the start of something new for Trevor? I do not. For 4 consecutive seasons, he was one of the most durable players in the NBA. He missed a total of 8 games over the previous 4 full NBA campaigns. Over the last 5 seasons now, let's include this year where he missed 15 games, Trevor Ariza has averaged exactly 2.4 three-pointers per game by averaging, and I read, 2.3, 2.4, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 three-pointers over the last 5 years. Over the last 5 years, he's averaged 14, 13, 13, 12, and 12 points per game. Over the last 5 years, he's averaged 1.6, 1.9, 2, 1.8, and 1.5 steals per game. And rebounds, 6, 5.5, 4.5, almost 6, and 4.5. He is almost as consistent as Klay Thompson in a much less exciting fashion because over those 5 years, he's also averaged 1.7, 1.7, 1.4, 0.9, and 0.8 turnovers per game. He is Mr. 3-and-D consistency. He was number 58, by the way, this year in 9-cat, so there's your Trevor spot, just right back where he always belongs. And I don't foresee his role changing a ton in Phoenix. He's going to get his 9 to 10 shots per game. Right? Like everybody's like, well, Phoenix has Devin Booker. He's a chucker. And DeAndre Ayton they just brought in. And TJ Warren's a chucker. And Josh Jackson is a chucker. Okay, yeah. But he just got finished playing 4 seasons in a row with James Harden. There are very few guys in the NBA who took more shots per game than James Harden. In fact, I think he might have been number 1 this year. By a half shot over Devin Booker. So Ariza certainly played with guys that have taken a lot of shots. The key here is, can Phoenix find him when he's open? I believe the answer is yes, because I think there's going to be a helter-skelter nature to things in Phoenix that wasn't really the case with the Rockets. Houston played a slower pace this year than people realize. They were not number 1 in the NBA. I think when you got D'Antoni, there's this assumption that it's going to be get it and go. There's a lot of ISO with Houston and a lot of pick and roll, and those things take a few seconds to develop. Phoenix was just fire away. Get it across half court, boom, shoot it, somebody. All they have to do now is add just a hair of discipline to that, and Ariza is, they believe, part of what's going to bring that to the team. So a helter-skelter style of play means he'll get his three-point looks. It means his steals should come back up again. Just balls banging around off of people. Ariza's got those long arms and incredible vision on the defensive side. I also believe the rebounding could improve for Ariza. He didn't rebound the ball all that well this year for Houston. I think some of that, it wasn't minutes, because he was still up around 34 minutes per game, which is, where he's been for the last half decade. Clint Capella, being healthy all year, played a big role in that. James Harden does a decent amount of rebounding. PJ Tucker does a lot of rebounding from that kind of 3-and-D spot on the floor as well. Chris Paul, better than average rebounding point guard, although he was with Pat Beverly beforehand, so I don't think you can chalk it up to that. Is he slowing down? Yeah, there's a possibility. I mean, he's been in the NBA forever. But I do think that there's room for improvement here, and I think that what we've heard is he's going to be largely the power forward for Phoenix, which means closer to the bucket on the defensive side, more opportunities to rebound, more opportunities to do stuff on the defensive end, and then just chuck some threes up there, shoot your low-volume 41% or whatever it turns out to be, and you'll be number 60 again. He might just get there a tiny bit different way with Phoenix. In fact, I think he might even be better. You might see the threes come down ever so slightly, but I do think there's a very real chance that the rebounding and the defensive numbers are better So I like Trevor Ariza. Nobody ever likes Trevor Ariza. I like Trevor Ariza. Give the poor guy some credit. And the last name that we're going to talk about on today's podcast, we'll make it a 5-pack today, is Will Barton. I don't know how we've not talked about Will Barton so far. He basically signed the first contract of the free agency period, and everyone was just like, oh, cool. Sorry, kind of stole that phrasing from John Oliver. Then Paul George signed, and everybody forgot Will Barton existed. Barton got himself $50 million, which is pretty sweet. 4-year deal, so he'll be in Denver for a while. And he's coming off a year where I feel like he was criminally undervalued. And I'm an idiot. I traded him early in the season because I thought that his percentages would weigh him down. And as it turned out, they got better as the season went on. His free throw shooting looked poor to start the year, and that ramped up to a near career best 80.5%. Solid marks for Barton there. The steals and blocks were low right out of the chute, and those ended up getting to 1 and 0.6, which isn't great, but 1.6 combined isn't bad, right? Because he was okay in both. His field goal percent ended up being a career best 45.2. He ended up making a career high 1.93 pointers. Far and away his career best 4.1 assists per game and a career high 15.7 points. This is a guy who has carved himself a role with the Denver Nuggets that's just not really going to go away. The issue with Will Barton, and this is where the discussion pivots, is will he be overvalued? He was number 52, by the way, in 9-cat formats this year, which is very good. Very good. I don't know that he can go any higher. He played 33 minutes per game this season, far and away a career high. Basically 5 more minutes than the previous year. And if you want to chalk up a lot of his career highs, yes, the fact that his field goal percent went up, that's certainly a positive. But the rest of the numbers are kind of in line with a 15 to 20% bump in minutes. You averaged 13.7 points last year. You add another 2 to 3 points per that. Actually would have been a little bit higher than where he was this season. But most of the stuff for Barton was kind of in line with his per 36s. He just got really close to 36 minutes. And some of that, not all of it, but some of it certainly had to do with the litany of injuries that the Nuggets went through this season. Paul Millsap missed 3 months this year, and that left a wide open door for guys like Barton and Jamal Murray to do more than it seemed they were going to be asked to when the season began. The first 2 or 3 weeks of this year were not the strongest for Barton. Things turned for him basically when Millsap went down. And then he ramped it up in a big way. Barton went huge for stretches in a lot of statistical categories. Wilson Chandler did get traded. That's a help. We got to put that in the check plus column here for Barton's value. But Millsap is back. The Nuggets haven't really added a whole lot, at least in terms of guys that could sort of log jam things. But Jamal Murray, Gary Harris are going to start the year healthy. Nikola Jokic, Paul Millsap. They, of course, play at such a high tempo that it does create an opportunity for more guys to have fantasy value. But Jokic is the primary option. Millsap is the secondary option. And then Gary Harris, Jamal Murray, and Will Barton are all sort of sharing that third option title. It's why when Millsap went down, and when Chandler went down, and all these openings presented themselves, Barton was able to step through it. A lot of guys did, in fact, in Denver. I'm not drafting Barton around 52 this year. Maybe somebody will. Having Nuggets on your team is always a good decision because they play at such a high tempo, so there's fantasy value to go around. Will Barton is durable. That's something that definitely works in his favor. He played 81 games this year. He has a season under his belt where he's played 82. I think that was 2 years ago. But I don't know how he could possibly do more, right? There really isn't a part of his game that is going to magically make a flying leap forward. His scoring was good. It was a career-high field goal percent, so we can't really expect that to go much higher. His free throw number was on the high end of where he's been in his career, so we can't expect that to go much higher. The three-pointers, I don't think we can expect a 33 minutes per game to go up. I think the only thing you look at with Barton and think, well, maybe there's room for improvement here would be the steals department, but he hasn't really been a big steals guy at any point in his career anyway. It hasn't really been his game. When he first got traded to the Denver Nuggets, he had a stretch of about 2 months where he averaged 1.2 steals per game, and that was sort of the best run of his career. So this is one of those things you have to look at. It's why I'm trying to turn the clock back to last year. It's why we wrote off certain guys going into last season. It's why we talk a lot about Giannis Antetokounmpo. And everybody says Dan hates Giannis. No, Dan is just looking at these numbers and saying, where is there room for improvement? Where is there room for things to fall a little bit? And with Giannis, 2 seasons back, we looked at those and we're like, oh my God, those defensive numbers, those are not sustainable. When he gets help on this team, when he has to do more of the offensive work, and sure enough, they came down. The caveat, of course, I said, look, if he adds the three-pointer or he fixes his free throw stroke, then it balances itself out. But he didn't. Will Barton doesn't even really have that potential balancing side. There isn't one category here where you're like, well, here's a category where Will Barton is markedly worse than the league average where he could show improvement. He made 2 3-pointers per game. In fact, there were only 2 statistical categories where Will Barton was worse than the league average, and even those, it was barely. 5 rebounds, but at a shooting guard spot, that's actually not bad. 45% shooting. At a shooting guard spot, that's really not that bad. He was basically average at almost every statistical category or slightly above it in scoring and assists. So there just isn't a thing that Barton was bad at where you can point and you can say, oh, there's something he could work on in fantasy. This is how he can get to the next level. It's not there. Mathematically, it's not there. What is there for Barton is a potential loss of, 2 to 3 minutes per game. If Denver's fully healthy this year and he plays closer to 30 instead of 33, which still, by the way, makes him a fantasy value, but a 10% drop-off takes him from 16 points to 14.5, from 2 threes to 1.7 or 1.8, down to 4.5 rebounds, 3.8 assists, 0.8 steals. Those little dips take him from a top 52 guy to more like a top 65 or 70 guy. So I'm looking for Will Barton closer to 75 to 90 range, and I think he'd be a very safe pick in that department, where if everything breaks your way, he puts up numbers similar to last year. But that's a best-case scenario, friends, because his turnovers were also very low. So there just isn't an obvious spot for him to turn a corner. He turned it. He turned it in almost every category last year. So I love Will Barton, but I also hate Will Barton, and I'm probably not going to end up with him because I got a feeling people are going to be grabbing him around 65, and I don't want him yet. I want him in the 75 to 90 range, preferably after 80. Because I think there's a very real chance that he falls from 55 down to 65 or 70, and I don't want to blow a pick in the 65 range on a guy that doesn't really have much upside beyond that. So again, all of these guys we talked about today were special for a particular reason, either good or bad. Elfrid Payton coming off a terrible year, opportunity to better himself. JaVale McGee moving from a team where the options at center were so good, meaning Draymond freaking Green, that there was just no reason to play him more than a couple of minutes as kind of a momentum shifter. But now he goes to a team that has no options at center. Mario Hezonja going to a place that apparently wants him. I would have loved it if they gave him more money, because then you could argue, well, they gave him money. They're going to play him. I think they're going to play him anyway. The Knicks are trying to go younger. The one-year deal thing means that they could bail on Hezonja, but there is nice upside there. Trevor Ariza, I think people are going to sleep on him because he's a sleepy fantasy asset, but I love him. I love having that dude on my team. At the end of the year, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, okay, that was safe. But think about it, though. I bet he falls to 75 or 80. I think people are just going to write him off, and he's going to give you a round and a half of value on that. And then Will Barton, who probably will go a little bit too early, but is a fun fantasy player to own. Tomorrow, Neil Rochlani and we will continue our tour of the free agency list. We got a lot of names left to cover. Trying to whittle these down to names that are actually worth talking about. And then Adrian and Neil will wrap things up. They'll talk about a handful more free agents. You may get a repeat or two in there simply because we're different voices on this podcast. And next week, we'll crack open how all of these signings impact the guys around them. For instance, if we had done that today, we would have talked about, what does a Trevor Ariza signing mean to the Phoenix Suns? What does it mean for TJ Warren, Devin Booker, Josh Jackson, DeAndre Ayton? The answer is, hopefully he's going to rein them in a little bit, but probably not very much. Right? So that's the type of thing we're going to do for all of these guys. I think there will probably be a show where we just talk about the LeBron James signing, and then we talk about the Lakers for 40 minutes, and then the next day we talk about the Cavs for 40 minutes. There's so much that goes into that stuff. And that's why I wanted to dedicate more time, individual shows, to breaking down the ramifications around the players, and then this week where we talk about the players themselves. I am once again Dan Besbris. Tweet at me. Let me know what you think I should name that British woman. What should her name be when we refer to her on the podcast? At Dan Besbris on Twitter. At Hoopball Fantasy. Give him a follow as well. At Hoopball Lakers. At Hoopball Kings if you want to follow some of our team pod coverage. New pods coming soon here at Hoopball. Really excited. I've already started to hear some of the demo episodes, and they sound fantastic. Again, tomorrow, Thursday, Neil and myself. Then things wrap up on Friday. Have a wonderful Wednesday, everybody. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.